ready?
Rolling.
Okay. So, Bernie, tell us about yourself, your name, spelling, your age, how long have you been in Cobb, where were you born, and describe your parents and what influence they had on your life.
Okay, my name, my legal name is Bernard Loam Brown Jr. Let me see, B-E-R-N-A-R-D.
Cheers. Yeah.
There you
L-O-A-M, like, fertile dirt.
go. Yeah.
Brown, B-R-O-W-N, Jr. But I go by Bernie. I was born in Meta, Georgia, 78 years ago. My 79th birthday will be in November. My dad was a Methodist minister. And in those days, the Methodist system required minister preachers to move from about every 4 to 5 years. So my experience growing up was to be a traveler from one town to the other, and we lived in every 4 or 5 years we moved. That had some real advantages, but a lot of disadvantages too. My dad and my mom just had a tremendous effect on me. They were just, I couldn't ask for better parents as far as I'm concerned. He was so well respected. He lived till be 80. He actually had a stroke in his early 60s, and that changed his life, and he had to retire early and this sort of thing. And it had an impact. That had an impact on me too, to note how health and your health can impact your lifestyle and your health status and so forth. Growing up, I moved from school to school, and we lived throughout the South Georgia area. I went to college in a couple of places. We lived in Savannah when I graduated from high school, and I went to Armstrong Junior College, and that day it's expanded and it's a large university now. And then we moved to Valdosta, Georgia, and I completed my undergraduate degree there at Valdosta State University, it's called now. Immediately beyond that, then I went off to graduate school. I met my wife at Valdosta. We got married soon after that, and my family has just been so special to me, and not only my parents, but I have 3 sisters. I have a wonderful wife and grandchildren now. We have three grown married children and 8 grandchildren.
The one thing we found when we've been interviewing people is the godfathers of Cobb were extraordinary people like yourself. They are the ones that created this community like it was or is today. But it's hard work. It's a lot of time. And people have been talking about their wife and how supportive they were in their journey to create this community. Talk a little bit about your wife and why she was so important and how she helped you.
Well, my wife is named Snooky. That's her nickname. Her real name is Annette. And she has 3 other siblings, and I always kidded her mother, my mother-in-law, that I got the pick of the litter. And I really believe that. She was the oldest, and I was the oldest. So I think we had that in common as background, and she was very involved in many of the things that I was involved in. We were both involved in our church, our community, and this sort of thing growing up. Our parents were involved in those things too, so they led us in that regard. So we had so much in common when we met. She is unbelievable. She's a giving person. She's a caring person in every way, and then everybody benefits from that, but probably the husband or the spouse benefits more from that type of individual. Throughout my career, we chose early on to make this a team effort, and she embraced that totally. She worked some, but not a lot, because she was, as she says, she was a stay-home mom, and helped raise our kids and this sort of thing, but was active in so many volunteer areas and this sort of thing. So she was a great example, still is a great example for me. We've been married 56 years, and I just don't remember when we weren't together. But she is a wonderful, wonderful, special person.
And so, of course, since she was close to you and the team, she was a part of creating the WellStar system. What I'd love to hear is your view as a leader in getting WellStar from where it is today, going back to where it got started. But if you just tell the WellStar story.
Well, I was trying to think when in preparation for our little time together today, when it all started, and thinking through it, I would say the beginning of WellStar probably occurred in 1950 with the opening of Kennestone Hospital. It was there was a hospital in Marietta at the time, a private hospital that some of the doctors ran and this sort of thing, and I'm not familiar that much with that other than just having heard about it. But Kennestone Hospital opened in 1950. It was in the city of Marietta. It was run by the City of Marietta Hospital Authority at that time, which meant that it was a city hospital, if you will. It was located out on, I think, one of the higher spots in the city limits, because from that spot you could look to the rear of off of Church Street, and you could see Kennesaw Mountain. And then you could also look out to the front of the building, because it was many, many miles away, but you could see Stone Mountain out there. So this new word was coined by taking Kennesaw and knocking the saw off the end of it and plugging stone on it, and it became known as Kennestone Hospital, named because it sat between these two really famous mountains, one where a battle was fought, one is a tourist attraction, this sort of thing. There's some significance to that as far as I'm concerned, because Kennesaw Mountain is an ever-changing mountain. I've viewed it from the top of the hospital, and every season it changes. The leaves come, they go. Sometimes it's barren, sometimes it's beautiful, this sort of thing. It's an ever-changing type of landscape. You look at it, Stone Mountain, though, and it never changes. In the winter you can look at it, summer you can look at it, spring you can look at it. It's always the same. From that, I gained a lesson one time, is that life is that way, and organizational life is probably that way too. There are certain things that are ever changing. There are certain things that never change. And the key to it, from my perspective, is don't get them mixed up. So if you maintain your focus on those things that should never change, like in a healthcare organization, caring and serving and dealing with the needs of people, that should never change. The buildings would change, the people would change, the technology would change, and that sort of thing. So one of the keys to that is the lesson that came from the original hospital, Kennestone Hospital. Some things constantly change, some things should never change. It grew. I have a rendering of it. It's just it was a basic wing, just with a front that faced Church Street in Marietta, and then over time it was they added some wings to the side of either side of it and so forth. I came to be what in those days called the hospital administrator in 1971. I was 31 years old then, which was, looking back on it, absolutely amazing. When I became involved in the process, when they had an opening, Snooki and I had a discussion about it, and at first I said, I don't need to go do that. I'm not qualified to do that. I'd never been the chief executive officer of an institution before, of a healthcare institution. I'd been in the number 2 jobs or 3 jobs or whatever. And then we talked a little bit and said, but it'd probably be good for the experience, because you need to have experiences like this, because when you get ready, you'll know what to expect and that sort of thing. So I came over, and it was terrible. The day I came over, I flew from Augusta, where we lived at that time, over in a plane that was a prop type plane that they had back in those days, and it was a stormy afternoon, and I got air sick. I get car sick even today. And I came in, and I just had all kind of issues. The story's long about how this came about. But I ended up over for the interview, and I just didn't feel good. And I think I showed my worst self. I was totally honest about everything. I was honest about myself. I told them what I thought my weaknesses were and what my strengths were, my lack of experience and all this. And then I told them a few things too. They had had a history of a lot of turnover in this particular job, and I didn't want to particularly go to a position where you don't stay very long and so forth. And so all that came out in the discussion and so forth. And we were told, the others that interviewed that same day, I think, we were told, well, you'll get a call tomorrow and let you know whether you did or whether you didn't get the job. And so I went back home that night, flew back, got back sort of late, got up the next morning, went to work and doing my thing, and wasn't even thinking that much about it because it was so, I had done so bad, I thought. And then I got a call, and Mr. Wilder Little was the chairman of the hospital authority at that time, and he said, Bernie, he said, we would like for you to be our hospital administrator. It blew my mind. And so I became the hospital administrator at the age of 31 at this really nice hospital in a wonderful place.
I'm going to stop you there. By the way, if you want to get some water or something, feel free to do so. I know
Okay.
just sitting here, it's helpful. But I'd be real interested in describing the hospital when you got there. How many beds? I mean, you've actually told some stories already, which we love. But I'd like to know kind of where it was at the time that you took over, and then we'll take the journey to it.
Yeah. It had, I don't remember exactly, it had around 100 beds. The budget that year was $10 million. And I thought, 31 years old and being responsible for a $10 million budget, and we had 700 employees in round figures. And so that's the sort of, it had around, in those days we really did measure by beds. Today it's, because so many things are handled, outside the hospital per se, but part of the system, the bed count is not that as significant. In those days it was I want to say a little bit under a 200 bed hospital, which was a nice sized hospital in our state at the time. The one thing I remember most vividly about it, though, it had the second most active emergency room in the state of Georgia. The largest one was Grady Hospital in Atlanta, and it was a small facility. It was inadequate. There was nothing about it that was adequate to take care of the numbers that were coming in from the emergency room. Someone asked me one time, they said, why is your emergency room so big? And there are probably many reasons for this. The community was growing and it was a lot of traffic. But I-75 was not complete yet. And I don't remember exactly where it stopped, but it was up one of the exits up above Marietta, and they would divert the traffic onto 41. It came right through, and then it would go back into Atlanta, and 285 was not complete yet either. And I can recall at one time the intersection of Roswell Road and 41, where the Big Chicken is, had the largest number of accidents, vehicular accidents of any intersection in the state and probably in the United States, because the people would come off of I-75 and not realize they were not on an interstate anymore, and they were coming to that. But those kind of issues. But the emergency room was sort of our trademark in a sense because of that. It was a full service hospital though, and it had all the potential of taking care of what would come later, the tremendous growth that would come in our area. I believe the population of Cobb County at that time was around, I want to say around 75,000, something like that, versus what 700,000-800,000 today, and so forth. Most people in my position in their career move many times as they move up the ladder, because usually you work in a smaller place and then you have an opportunity for a larger place, just like other professions, so forth. I was one of the very few that stayed in the same organization for 30 years, and what allowed me to do that, other than hopefully doing a decent job and they kept me, is that there was growth there, and so we could see the potential of what could potentially happen here with not just the health system, but with the education system and the Kennesaw State and all the different different components of the community here. You could grow without having to leave, and that occurred.
Can you describe the culture of the hospital then?
The culture was excellent. What makes a hospital to me is the people. Fortunately, we just had a tremendous amount of good folks. We had, I would say, an outstanding medical staff for the size place that we had, and so forth. And it was excellent. The physicians here, they were well trained. We had a good variety of specialists, even though the specialties started growing more and more later as we expanded and this sort of thing. And my feeling is excellence attracts excellence. So from the physician standpoint, the die was set that we were going to have good doctors here and this sort of thing, and we have over the years. It's been amazing how this place has attracted folks in that regard. But in addition to that, the people that worked there were just great. The nurses, they were just so devoted to this. They believed in what they were doing,
You ran a big hospital system, if you don't mind. How much did they pay you when you started? Do you remember?
Yeah, I do remember, because I got involved in I was not so oriented to pay, but everybody wants to get paid as much as they can, that sort of thing. When I decided to go into into hospital administration, I interviewed a couple of hospital administrators because they didn't know a lot about it. My background was not in that area. And what amazed me, the first one I interviewed, he told me, he said, this was in the 1960s. He said, I want to tell you, Bernie, this job does not pay a lot compared to out in the field of business and this sort of thing and so forth, but you get your rewards with serving and caring and all that kind of stuff. He said, I make $12,000 a year. And then I interviewed with another guy that was telling me, he said he made $13,000 a year. So my goal before the end of my career was to make $13,000. I didn't even allow for inflation, if you will. So when I took the job, I remember it was in the paper, and it said Augustine Bernie Brown has been hired as a new hospital administrator for Kennestone Hospital at a salary of $26,000. I thought I had died and gone to heaven, because that was twice what I will hope to ever make in the course of my whole career. So that's where I started.
Tell me about the governance of the hospital then.
This was interesting because it evolved over time to something different. But as I mentioned, the board was the Marietta Hospital Authority. In those days, and still, this is hospital authorities exist, but they don't run hospitals. They usually restructure, and then they move out and have representative folks that come in to be in the boards and so forth. But it was run by the Marietta Hospital Authority. These board members were appointed by the city of Marietta. They were great. A couple of them were doctors, and then others were community leaders. Dr. Lucius Atherton, who the Atherton place was named for a little bit later. His son was Red Atherton, Howard Red Atherton, who was the mayor of Marietta and while in the legislature and this sort of thing. Some of the others that were on there, T.W. Lord. Mr. Lord has an insurance agency. He was the longest serving board member that ever served on the Kennestone side of this. Pete Wood, who was on the Cobb side, served I think a little bit longer than T.W. did. It was that kind of folks, just really strong community folks. The city of Marietta, the city council of Marietta had taken had gone to great lengths to make sure we had good quality people, because this was a new endeavor for them. And in the early stages, this was before Medicare and Medicaid was even in existence. That's the setting that we were in. there was some money that was actually given to support indigent care by the city, and many counties and cities did this because that was needed for that. It was a culture that changed a great deal over time with Medicare, Medicaid coming into effect, and the whole industry changing. One of the important things, and this was a key to this, when the hospital was under city hospital authority, it really limited it because the financing of the facilities and growth and that sort of thing is generally done through what is called revenue certificates or bonds, and these bonds are backed by the political subdivision that's over the institution. Well, the index for the city of Marietta was really relatively small. For Cobb County, it was much bigger, and so there was a very much limited to what Kennestone could grow and do. So there was already a hospital in Cobb County. It was called Cobb General then, Cobb Hospital now, Wellstar Cobb Hospital, that had been built under the county. So we had a city hospital, a county hospital, and that was going to lead us nowhere. There was an effort early on that said, why not merge these two and so forth, but there was political reasons that just didn't get done and so forth. I was supportive of the concept, though it had to be worked out and so forth. But a decision was made to move the Kennestone from under the Marietta Hospital Authority to another Cobb Hospital Authority. It was called the Kennestone Cobb Hospital Authority. A lot of great names in Cobb County history and Marietta helped work through that politically to work this out. People like Al Burris and Ernest Barrett and Joe Mack Wilson and others that were politically in the right places and all to accomplish that. So anyway, that was accomplished. So we had then two hospital authorities under Cobb County, and this would allow later down the line, sometime later, and we can talk about that in a few minutes, of putting the two hospitals together, because hospitals will be getting more and more to be competitive with each other, and you could easily duplicate services unnecessarily and all this sort of thing, and you couldn't take advantage of economies of scales and whatnot without being together. So that was a key decision that was made that allowed things in the future to come about.
You'll stop for a moment.
Well, no. One of the things that we, particularly Perlman, and I think Isaacson talked about too, the Kennesaw State, Kennestone, Wellstar, the whole kind of area sprung out of a conversation between a couple of guys at a laundromat. I'm not sure.
Yeah, this was Cobb and this was Cobb and Kennestone. Yeah, I can talk about that.
Is that all right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, because that ties. We'll take certain storylines and have multiple speakers on the same storyline.
Yeah. Well, after Kennestone went through a major construction program that really put it on the map. It grew to maybe 350, 400 beds at that time, and a new emergency room and all that sort of thing to take care of the needs that were there. Cobb was continuing to develop in their part of the county and this sort of thing. There were two or three things that happened that occurred. There was an expansion of beyond the walls of the hospital. The hospitals have developed from my way I like to put it. You can almost tell what they were called at different points in time as to what they are in the evolution of them. For instance, the hospital was the center at one point. And then it was determined that, that we need to be doing other things and broader than that, and so the hospital became the medical center. And then there was a need, well, we need to go beyond all of that. We need to take care of other health care needs and that sort of thing. And so it became the health care center. The Kennestone's name even changed that. It went from Kennestone Hospital to Kennestone Regional Medical Center to Kennestone Health Care System. And then the ultimate, and it's called today the Wellstar. Wellstar is called the Wellstar Health System. It's even beyond just care. is trying to influence these kind of things in the community that will assist in raising the health status of the community and the people there, and so forth. So it was evolving all through this, and a lot of this, there are a lot of competitive aspects that go on with this between institutions. Today is a good example in the Atlanta area. They've evolved into several large systems, and the systems sort of compete with each other, whatever. One of the things that we're doing at the time is we were developing urgent care centers, which is sort of a little mini non-emergency type things that are out in communities. We at Kennestone, we probably had 6 of them and this sort of thing. So one day we realized we had put one out in the I can't remember exactly what it was out. I can't remember whether Powder Springs Road or Dallas Highway, one of those areas. We put one of these into place, and we looked around the corner, and Cobb Hospital had one too, and they were right across the street from each other. And it really, we did it independently. We weren't talking to each other or anything. We just did it, and then we had these 2 things. Well, our 2 boards said, "What are we doing here?" You know, and I think we said too. Richard Hubbard and Tom Hill were involved at Cobb at the time, and we were good friends. And we said, "We don't need to be doing this. We don't need to be doing this." So that began raising the concern about, are we doing something in our own county that's counterproductive? We're duplicating service, that sort of thing. So at the time, we had the need to move the laundry from Kennestone. It was right in the building, and laundry is not something you want to have in your building because it's the highest rate of fires and issues because of the nature of it and this sort of thing. It's large equipment and that sort of thing. And so we needed to move our laundry out of the hospital building. That freed up some areas to do some things in the main building and everything. So we got into a discussion about where to put this. So we're going to put it remotely. About the same time, Cobb Hospital, Bob Prilliman and Chet Austin could tell this story and make it a lot more dramatic than I can, but they were doing the same sort of thing, and so we ended up having a conversation and said, well, why don't we do this together? You know, why have this equipment's expensive and all? Let's just do it all together. We can run it. We did it. It was a tremendous success. It allowed us to free up space in our building. It allowed us to move things out of the building that shouldn't be in there in the first place. The cost of processing linen and laundry and all went down significantly, and it was just a real interesting exercise. That led to further conversations as, can't we do more like this? And then that ended up developing into what ultimately became a consolidation, a merger between Cobb Hospital and Kennestone. And at that time, it was known as the Northwest Georgia Health System. That was the name that we had, which evolved ultimately into the WellStar system. It was so successful. In the meantime, we had bought Windy Hill Hospital, Kennestone had. Cobb was affiliated with the hospital in Dallas and in Paulding. And so that brought us together. So we basically had 5 hospitals as part of this new system. And it got a lot of notoriety, not only locally, but statewide, nationally, about, this might be the way to do things in the future. It led into some other things that some people would say, was it a failure? We got so much traction on this that we started having other institutions in the Atlanta area contacting us. We had Piedmont Hospital contact us, DeKalb Hospital, Gwinnett Hospital, Southern Regional Hospital. They all started talking with us about the possibility, if you can do that just at that stage, couldn't we do it in a broader standpoint? And so we developed a strategy, and we did it. We could not put all these folks together. The cultures were different. They were financially, they were in different geographic areas and this sort of thing. But we had a joint venture that we all came together that we called Promina. which we operated for about 5 years, I guess. There was a belief at the time that there was going to be some other mergers, and there was a lot of discussion about Emory merging with Hospital Corporation of America, which would have been a gigantic competitive force out there, because that was one of the large. That was a large. They were the largest system at the time in the area, and then HCA was the largest private hospital system in the country, and all that. And there was apprehension about what could we need to do for all of us that are in the nonprofit community hospital area. So we formed this effort, and we learned a lot. It did not survive, but I viewed it as we learned a lot about what works and what doesn't work. What kept it from surviving, in my view, is there was no way to merge the assets. There was no way to really bring it close enough together in control and that sort of thing that we were able to do later with the WellStar model. And so, the economies of scale and the computer systems and the purchasing programs and all that we put into place were models that are used throughout in other places now. So it was good.
Let me stop you a little bit because I'm doing in my mind a timeline.
Okay.
So when all of that discussion about the early stages of integration, what time frame was that in?
Well, the merger, it really started moving with the merger of Kennestone and Cobb. That occurred in the, I want to say the early 1990s, and then I recall we really decided that we needed to have our physician integration as part of this. This was going on nationwide. I remember traveling out to California and Washington State and Oregon, that sort of thing, where these things were really being done. Managed care, as they call it today, was coming into place. This was where the financing of healthcare would be done more on a per capita basis rather than on a basis of fee-for-service and that kind of thing. So you had to position yourself to deal with all these sorts of things. And so several of our, Rob Lipson, who ultimately became the CEO at WellStar, he and I and Tom Hill, who was involved at the time, and several others made a trip really throughout the country to look at places that integration was going on, meaning the consolidation of institutions, but also the consolidation of physician practices and all these sorts of things. The early stages of this brought mainly primary care physicians into the fold because they were sort of driving the process in terms of managing patients and this sort of thing. So it sort of occurred. I'd say it really started moving rapidly, probably in the late 1980s throughout the 1990s, and by the early 2000s, most everything was in place.
How did the name change to WellStar?
Well, when the Promina organization was in existence, and WellStar and the Northwest Georgia part of that decided, and they weren't the only ones. Piedmont decided that this wasn't going to work for them too. They backed back out of that into that, and it was named at that particular point in time. And it was I don't know exactly. I'm sure there was some consulting folks that helped guide that and so forth. But the idea of it was wellness. That a health system is responsible to the community for promoting wellness, which is something beyond just healthcare. Healthcare is a part of wellness. Promoting healthy lifestyle is a part, and the ultimate goal is wellness. And so I'm sure at the time, and I was not directly involved in this, but it was the idea of supporting the health status and wellness of the community, and of course to be a star in it. The slogan now, you know, is world class, and the idea of we're going to do it as good or better than anybody else, and that's sort of the way it came about.
Ty can remember this. We've had interviewed people that talked about a lot of resistance from a newspaper publisher about not being the city hospital anymore. There was a lot of resistance to that, and of course Otis had resistance to a lot of things, but we had a couple of people talk about that. We won't put you on the spot to do that, but are there any stories that were
We're going to have a good section about Otis.
Yeah. And it's good and bad.
Well, let me say,
He's a star of the county. I mean,
in my view, Otis Brumby was one of the, you talked about godfathers, and by that I mean influence, and as well as positive, very positive type thing over the years. I'll give you my Otis story. This is in my book, so I can, and he and I talked about it. There were two or three things. Early on was that the paper took the position that there shouldn't be two different hospitals in the county. So there was always the promotion of through the newspaper, why don't we do this and this sort of thing. And so there was that coming from Otis. Otis saw this, envisioned this before anybody else, you know, in a sense. But it's easier said than done. And so the issues were not, you know, whether to do it or not. The issue was how to do it and when to do it and this sort of thing. So there was not a conflict so much in there, but it was constant. It was constant needling, you know, by Otis. One of the more significant things to me personally, though, was when we formed the Promina group. Promina was made up of different systems. It was 5 different systems. It was the Northwest Georgia Health System, which was our system, the Piedmont system, the Gwinnett Health System, the DeKalb Health System, and the Southern Regional Health System. The cultures in all these places were different. We had always felt that we were subject to open records, the open records law. Roy Barnes was our attorney, and he was one of the proponents of open records and this sort of thing. But some of these other institutions did not take that same position. So at the Promina level, which had these different organizations, Otis wanted to have records, wanted to have access to open records for all these things. Well, some of these organizations weren't even under public authorities or anything like that, so they took the position. So we were at the Promina level where I was the CEO at that particular time. We were having difficulty on how we deal with all this. You know, are we open to the open records law, or are we not? The board there took the position we were not, because there were representatives from all these boards, and we were one of the few that were doing this. And so we were sued by Otis, basically, the Marietta Daily Journal, over this. And it went to the Supreme Court of Georgia, I think, ultimately, and it was ruled that we were subject to it, which I was not. You know, I'd always operated on this, so it wasn't a big deal to me, other than, you know, but I think this was a little bit of the beginning of the breakup of this is what I mean, the cultures were different in this sort of thing. Well, in all of that, Otis had the way of if you were the target, he could be awful ugly, you know, and he was towards me. My wife used to. This is one of those things you talked about, how your wife supports you. She would get 10 times as mad as I would, because there'd be something in the paper, you know, about this, and pointed at me as the head of that, and so forth. Well, we went through all that, and it got resolved, and so forth. But I struggled with that, because it really made me mad. I'm trying not to use any bad words here, but Otis, who had been a friend, his daughter and my daughter went to high school together. I mean, we go to church together and that sort of thing. I had a hard time with this, and so one day I was at church. I was singing the choir at the time, and Otis would sit back in the back of the church. And he came in, and the whole time, I don't even remember what the preacher preached. I just remember singing a little bit. Then I'd look at him and get mad, and I'd just sit there. So finally, I said, this is not healthy, not for me anyway. So I decided to go meet with Otis, and nobody knew this at the time or anything like that. So I called him. I said, I'd like to come down and talk with you. So he and I went in the van. We closed the door. And I said, I need to apologize to you. And he said, well, what for? And I said, there are not many people I dislike as much as I dislike you. And you used to be my friend. And I'm just sorry that that I haven't been able to get beyond this. And so the only way I know to do it is to ask you to forgive me for this. And he said, well, I don't know that I need to forgive you. You may need to forgive me. And I said, well, we won't talk about that. But anyway, we had just a great conversation, sort of cleared the air. And he said, why don't we just call the end all of this, and we'll be friends again, which we were the rest of our lives, this kind of thing. But it was a very traumatic type thing, but but in a sense, it was one of those God things in the end that showed me that it serves no purpose to have bitterness and dislike for somebody to that extent, And he was doing his job like he thought he ought to, and I was doing my job like I thought we ought to, and there was just a conflict in that. And the good thing about it, we were able to resolve it personally, and we were friends for the rest of our time.
So can you remember what time frame that was when you decided, like I decided in maybe 2000, whenever it was.
That was probably in the late 1990s. That was probably in the late 1990s. I retired in 2001 from Wellstar, or what it was then. The reason I did that, I was 62. My dad had his stroke at age 62, and then he lived to 80. But that last 18 years was not good. He had a violent stroke, and he it affected everything in his whole life. Even his mind and his attitudes and all these sorts of things. And I said to myself, and Snooky and I had talked about it, that what I'd like to do for these high pressure jobs like these are, I really want to retire at 62 if I can. And so it worked out just right. I retired at 62 from then, and then I was appointed the what they call executive in residence at Georgia State University's Institute in Health Administration for a couple of years. And then my son is a consultant in healthcare, and so I worked with him for another 2 or 3 years. So I was able to sort of phase down out of this, and though I also got into publishing some books about all of these sort of things. So much of this things I published are my experiences on different aspects of this and life and this kind of thing.
So to talk a little bit about the transition from you to, was it Tom Hill next? But that transition leading up to Candace right now, that's part of this journey. It'd be really interesting.
Yeah. Well, actually, when I moved to Promina, Tom moved to the head of the Northwest Georgia Health System, and he remained there for a couple of more years or so. And then Rob Lipson was being groomed for this. Rob was a great guy. He very visionary type guy. He interestingly enough, he was my primary care physician, and even after he took the reins of at Wellstar, he kept 5 patients, I think, for his license purposes and everything. And I was one of the patients, so I really hated it when Rob was killed. It was devastating, not only as a personal friend, but he was my doctor and all this sort of thing. But it went from when I went up to Promina, Tom came in, then Rob Lipson came then, and then Greg Simone followed him for a couple of years, and then Reynolds Jennings who was a great healthcare executive with Tenet, which is one of the large health system. He came in for 4 or 5 years, I can't remember, and did a great job because of his expertise that developed. And then Candace was coming along in the system, and I think was over Kennestone at the time when Reynolds left, and then she was promoted into the to the CEO of Wellstar.
That the way you told that story about Otis, it's the greatest story I've heard so far. Seriously, we had somebody just went crazy about Otis. Still mad at him.
Well, I could be.
But I don't know if I was the entire.
That's kind of what we want. We want to, at least for that section, we want to, like, people liked him, people hated him. Like he had that much influence that it was kind of a love or hate thing. But either way, you had to listen.
Well, Otis, the good and bad about what you saw is what you got. I mean, he was he was
transparent.
He was transparent. That's right. And I like that. To be honest, the problem is when you are. Like Roy told me one time, I was really upset. I mean, I was ready to hire a lawyer. I was ready to. He said you can't win with a guy that buys ink by the barrel, and that was very true. Roy was our attorney at the hospital at the time, and but Otis made a tremendous contribution to our community, and Otis, what we call Little Otis. He's doing a fabulous job in my view, because he's in an industry now that's going through major changes, and it's been amazing how he's adapted to all of that too. So.
Well, I was I don't know if you remember or not, but I was the entire around town on Saturday morning. Actually, the entire around town, and then the next week or week after that, I was half around town, because Clem Doyle approached me. He said, "David, the school board is they're out of control. We need to figure out some way to work together." So as an internal consultant inside the company, I knew the best way to do it was to talk to each person individually and figure out what you could do to bring them together. Mm-hmm. What are the real differences? So I set up interviews with each one of them individually. And Otis always got the calendar of the superintendent, as you remember. And he got them every day. He got issued open records and got the calendar. And boy, he thought I was trying to get past the open records law. Mm-hmm. And that didn't sit well with him. Mm-hmm. Oh, I know how it hurts. People read that kind of stuff and they say, "Oh, I'm sure that Bernie was mad." No, wait till it happens to you. It's, when you got 20,000 people reading about you like you're a criminal.
I know. Well, he had a gift of making you look as bad as you possibly could look.
Yeah. And it was a good thing. We did darn well. Let's see. We covered a lot of stuff we were going to ask. Okay, here. Go ahead.
We don't have to do this now. We want to get a section on the wives of the Godfathers, kind of the Godmothers. It's like a section on the wives and the role they played. So if you have anything to say, we don't have to ask that now. I guess we can do that at the end.
Well, you've covered it, but is there anything left that you haven't said yet about your bride? Did she get together with, we've heard this before, some of the wives of your generation would console each other?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, one of the issues when we came, see, we were so young. Everybody was older than us. Everybody on my staff was older than me, and then she was 3 years younger than I was. And we had young children and a growing family and all this sort of thing. And we discussed a lot about what role should she play. And in a sense, and she sort of embraced that. She was sort of in the early stage, what we call the first lady of Kennestone. And we did a little book about our marriage, and she wrote about all this. It was so interesting because, and I was coming up in the ranks of, in my profession, I was the president of the Georgia Hospital Association and on the American Hospital Association organization and the American College of Healthcare Executives board and all this kind of stuff. I was getting into all that. And so we were going around being a part of all this, and we were always the youngest, you know. And she laughs about it now because so many times we were at banquets and different things. You've experienced all of this, and your wife was there, and she was always they would always sit her beside the person that was going to be the speaker at the banquet. So she was telling about all the different people that she had sat by over her life, you know, from Truett Cathy to Rosalind Carter, and I can't remember all of them, but just, you know, that level of folks, comedians and entertainers, or Miss America, you know, and all that sort of thing. And then when we would go to some of the meetings, we would sit with people like in that. And so we were sort of awed in a way at first, you know, and I was amazed at her because she's so pretty, and she's got such a wonderful winning personality, and she just cares about people, and so she can talk with you in a minute, and she knows all about you, you know, because she brings it out, everything. But she's that kind of person, and what an asset that was to me, you know. And so I don't remember anything much important that even I did in my job, you know, that a lot of times had a lot of implications that I didn't consult with her. And she brought a perspective, and still does, a perspective that is totally different. She brings the perspective of just the everyday person, and this kind of thing, and that's what you really need, you know. And she's just, you know, I know you feel about your wife the same way, but she's the, you know, the greatest blessing I ever had on this earth, and God just blessed us in so many ways, but. She's that kind of person, and she shows not. She is a musician. She has a degree in sociology and was thinking about social work and things like that. She chose not to go into all of that. She did things on a volunteer basis. She's been accompanist for groups and all that kind of things, and she has worked in social agencies. Even today, she works down at the Center for Family Resources, and she's on the board, several boards and that kind of thing. So,
well, one thing I tell people all the time is when you're in a high profile, you're in the paper all the time on the front page. Sometimes you let your head start swelling up too much. Pam was always one to bring me back down to earth.
That's good. That's
I'm
good.
glad you're doing well, but you know what? I need you to sweep the floor. You know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
We sort of tried to do this journey thing, if you will. Anybody goes through a long journey has certain points in their time where you could go this way or this way. In essence, you make a big decision about your system or whatever. What were the big decisions? You already covered a little bit of this.
Mm-hmm.
What were the real big decisions that if you look back and thought, gosh, if we'd gone that way, we'd had big trouble.
Mm-hmm.
But we chose to go this way,
Mm-hmm.
and it was right decision. We proved it's right now. What were those?
Well, I think we covered some of those.
Yeah.
The first thing, I tell you the reason they hired me, and I was told this later, you know, even being so young. In all the places I'd worked, there had been major building programs. So it was important, I felt, that we've got to get on with getting this facility up to speed, you know, to get it into a state of the art and that sort of thing. And so I came in 1971. The new facility that we had, I think, was open in 1974, 75, something like that. That we did the planning. It was at that time it was one of the largest construction program of any hospital in the state to date. So it was a major thing. So that was important. And part of that was moving from the city to the county. That could not have happened without that capability. That allowed us to fund the project, if you will. Then further down the line, I think these sequence of things of moving from a hospital to a medical center to a healthcare center, there were distinguishing points in time in all of that. And then the merger with Cobb, that was significant. The founding of Promina was significant. That taught, you have to, I look at things like You learn from everything you do. Some things you learn what works, some things you learn what doesn't work, and if you use those things that doesn't work, that helps you in the future in terms of what you do and that sort of thing. So it was not in vain from my perspective and that sort of thing. Then after that, of course, I was gone after that. We had when I was here, there were 5 hospitals, if you will, in a network of system, largely in the northwest area, mostly in Cobb, but around the edges of that. Then it began to be expanded beyond that. The hospital in LaGrange became a part of the system here, and then there was acquisition of the tenant hospitals that added, I think, 4 more hospitals. So it moved from 5 hospitals to 11 hospitals now, and the other aspects of that today. It's the largest health system in the state of Georgia, one of the largest community-based or locally based healthcare system in the United States.
As a historian, which you obviously are, what are going to be the big issues as you look back and turn around and look forward? What are going to be the biggest issues for this healthcare system to make a decision about, or that will be faced through insurance changes or whatever? We're growing. I assume we're covering costs and making some reserves, and things are going well right now. What are our future challenges as a hospital system?
Yeah, I think there is a national, some national country decisions that need to be made in healthcare, and I don't know where that's going to go. I have thoughts about it. I visited other countries and see how they do it. The German system, for instance, is a system that I think is very effective. I've been to Russia, I've been to China, I've been to England, and seen the systems there. Canada. What would fit there doesn't exactly fit here. So all that's got to be worked out and to fit, our culture and our thing. So there's going to be challenges and all of that. Going to always be challenges and all of that. I think the problem that I see, we even though we have, I believe the best health system in the world, health system as a country, the results of this are not good. We're the highest cost in the world, and then the result of all this is not very attractive. For instance, if you measure morbidity, mortality, things that you measure the health of the community of the country, we rank, instead of having the top cost, we rank in like maybe 15th or something like that. We're the number 1 cost, the 15th in terms of output. That has really not a whole lot to do with the health system. It has to do with society.
It's policy. It's policy structure the government's got to decide.
It's that and the demise of the conscience of our people. We have the highest probably addiction rate. We have the highest violence rates. We have the beginning to have the demise of the family instead of it. We always thought the American family is the ideal. It's disintegrating and all that. All those societal issues. We're facing the same thing in healthcare that the education system faces. Everything else, all of the services of a community. And I believe honestly that our policies promote this in a way. Our system of welfare, our system of healthcare, and all that promote not doing it right. It's almost like we moved away from a society that promoted individual responsibility to a society that promotes collective responsibility. If this group is doing something wrong, it's not their fault, it's everybody's fault, and all that. We got to get back to some of this. It's something broader than the healthcare system, but if the healthcare system in it all can contribute to moving us back morally to what this country was at one time, in my view, I think that would be helpful. And I don't know all the ways to do this, but it needs to. The education system needs to get on board with this too, because in a way they are they are moving in the wrong direction in regard to this same sort of thing too.
You said something a little while ago, Ty.
No, I'm sorry.
Say, Ty, we have talked about editing, but I think is really important, something that you said, because I've said it. Sometimes the worst mistakes you make become extremely advantageous going forward. You learn from them. You don't want too many of them, but you learn from them.
Yeah.
And the good corporations have a culture where mistakes are a learning opportunity. And personally, I spent 40 years at Southern Company, and I went all over the place, and I did a lot of internal management consulting. I ran business units and so forth. Then I came to run the chambers for 7 years, and I learned what CEOs face, which is not what a lot of people understand. I didn't plan programs. I dealt with political issues and all the problems, strategic issues and all that. So the reason I'm still working is I want to do some consulting work where I can keep people from making the stupid mistakes I made and that I saw other people make. If you keep people from stepping in a hole, that's going to be helpful.
Exactly. I agree.
want to take what I've learned and not just die and let it go away. I'd like to try to use it. I actually talked to Candace about the model. We all work in silos. And there's always the head of a silo. And it may be the CFO's job, maybe the marketing job, but there's somebody that heads each of those silos. And Candace has got to make a decision that crosses those silos. And if the head of those silos is reluctant from one way or the other to provide their input, you can get real bad decisions. And there's so many history, Walmart and Kmart, same 40 years ago, exactly the same company. The CEO made one decision that's responsible for the bankruptcy. The Bay of Pigs invasion with Kennedy, that's a well-written story where Schlesinger was sitting there and he was in a silo and he wouldn't speak up. I've had that happen in my chamber job. So that's sort of what my little niche is going to be, is to help people be open and candid at each of those intersections. And then you also want the silo people to talk to each other. Sometimes you just get in such tight silos, they don't come out of it.
What I had always, let me tell you my philosophy of leadership.
Please.
When I came here, we had a traditional structure. It was a hierarchy, where we have. You move up the chain, and as higher you go, the more rewards, economically and status and titles and all that kind of stuff. And I don't know this is unique in healthcare, but it was telling to me. One day, when I came, I did all that. I developed our structure. I had me up there in my box, and I had. If you go today, I had the president and the CEO, and then the vice presidents and the executive vice presidents, and then the middle management people, and then the workers and all so on. And in our organization, we also have another group called the volunteers. A lot of volunteers do a lot of things here. I thought one day, and this just sort of came to me, it was sort of a divine. I can't remember. It did through different ways, but I made the determination that I was probably the least valuable person here, because when somebody's sick, when somebody's injured, when they're sitting there, they don't need a CEO. They need a nurse. They need somebody at their bedside. They need somebody that's interacting with them, that's hands-on, taking care of them. They need doctors that have the expertise, that are treating them, and that sort of thing. I need to get out of the way. And yet I'm in the top role. And if you come to that conclusion that those that are delivering the services really are the most important, and they are the ones that are interacting with our customers, which are patients. If we structure it that way, that means the patient is the lowest denominator on the organization. So I decided, what if we took this organization, it looks like this, and we turned it upside down, and it looked like that. Now, if you look at that particular symbol, If I gave you enough time, you could figure it out. But that's the same symbol of a yield sign on the road. And yield means to surrender. Surrender, let that other guy go first, on the road sign. Another word for yield too is to yield a crop, to be productive. So yield has two connotations, but in this connotation, that means to surrender your status and make those other people. So that little book that I shared with you, that's what this is all about. It's about turning the organization upside down, and this sort of thing, and then what that means, how that all plays out in the day-to-day operation and this sort of thing. If you can do that and do it successfully, it's a servant leadership type approach to things. That can help destroy silos, because the biggest silo is your silo that you sit in, and if you surrender that, then you get people in a culture that is working, trying to work that way. Then they are serving each other and all that, and the end result is a product that is a whole lot better than it is if we sit here and we conflict with each other, whatever might be going on. And that was a 30-year effort to try to do this, and it was absolutely fascinating. I will see people out that work for us, and I won't even remember them. I mean, there'll be so many there. When we left, there were about 15,000 in our organization. There's probably 25,000 in it now. They would come up to me and they would say, I remember, the one thing I remember about you is when I started work at Kennestone, I came to an orientation program, and I made a point that every orientation, every 2 weeks, I did or somebody had somebody do it, would come and speak to the new employees that were hired during that cycle. I did that for 30 years or whatever it was. And you told us the story about turning the organization upside down. And the thing that you said that I remember most significantly is the purpose of this organization is to serve and to care for other people. And if you are not willing to be a servant, just go find another job somewhere. There are other jobs out there that you don't have to do this, but if you're going to work here, this is what you want to do. It's what you have to do. Because we want you to line up your purpose with the purpose of this organization. The purpose of this organization is to serve. Your purpose is to serve if you're going to be successful here. And they would just say, we knew that we were in the right place, And I tell you, it just stirred me, And I said, it's working, And I think you can. That's my view of how this can be done. I've shared that with other organizations and with in seminars and this sort of thing.
It gets, obviously, I totally agree with you. It gets harder and harder the bigger and bigger you get.
Mm-hmm.
And you start getting into metrics that come up with how well you're doing. You ask the customer, how did you get treated? I know when Pam got out of the hospital, they wanted an evaluation, and then they called us and did an oral evaluation, and then scoring and all that. When I sat down and talked to Candace a while back, I said, what bothers you most? What keeps you up at night? And she said, our customer metrics are not where they need to be. And I've got to figure out how at the safety philosophy, how at the frontline level, we drive the kind of culture we think we ought to have. And it's hard to do with the system.
You're exactly right. The bigger, the harder. I'll tell you one last story. When we were getting ready to open the new hospital in 1970 something, the little hospital, it was so, the communication system, you just stuck your head out the door and yelled out the hall and that kind of thing. It was just but the good thing about it, everybody knew everybody. Everybody was on the same team. Everybody, it was small enough that it still had that atmosphere of caring and sharing, service and all that kind of stuff. And I thought, well, when we get in this big hospital, you know, we're going to have different communication system that's going to be up, you know, 7 stories instead of 2, and all, you know, and these people are not going to see each other. Now, how are we going to do all this stuff? How are we going to maintain the service orientation in a larger organization? So I decided that what we needed to do is come up with a defined purpose that everybody could own, a defined credo. And I said, it could be like a slogan. So at the time, we had a guy that was he was worked for Coca-Cola on our board, and I talked with the board about this. I want to come up with something that we'll own as an organization. And he said, well, you know, at Coca-Cola Company, we got these little slogans all the time. They're really good. We have this great company that does this. And I'll ask the consultant that we use to come over and talk with you, and they help you with this. So anyway, the guy came over, and he was real nice, real professional. Did the big slideshow and everything that showed me, and it just really looked good. And I said, well, how much will it cost to do this? And you come up with a slogan and everything. And he said, well, I realize, you know, you're not the Coca-Cola company, so we do this, you know, for small companies too. And he said it'll be about $400,000. And I said, well, let me think about it. So there were some local firms here that would do sort of the same thing, but not to that extent. So I had them come in, one of them come in that I liked. And I said, same thing, and they said, well, if we could do it probably for about $80,000. Well, our bottom line at that time was around $100,000 a year, which, you know, proportionally it's not bad, but that would have wiped out the bottom line. So I said, hey, you know, there's no way we're going to do this, you know. And so I brought it to our leadership group, our vice presidents and all that kind of thing. And I said, I really want to do this, but I just can't come up with the right way to do it. And I don't think we ought to spend even $80,000 or whatever it was, and much less $400,000. I told them that. And so we had the vice president of our patient service, which was nursing at the time, and her name was Betty Hamilton. She was a good bit older than me, and real perceptive. She said, Bernie, I think we could do this a different way. And I said, what's that? And she said, I think what we ought to do is we ought to have a contest in the organization and ask our people what they think it would be a good slogan for our organization that depicts what we are and all that kind of thing. He said, we know more about ourselves than these other people do. I mean, she was very persuasive. And I said, well, how are we going to get people to participate in this? And he said, well, we'll have a contest, and we'll give them a prize, and then you can work out however you want to judge it and everything. And I said, well, how much do you think we ought to put in as a prize? And she said, I guarantee you, if you put $200 in, we'll get a lot of interest in it. So anyway, we get this contest going. We're going to give $200 for the winner. And we had a little committee, and then we had the board had a committee. They had a personnel committee or something on the board at the time that we say, okay, you guys are going to make the final decision. We're going to bring the top 5 to you. And it'd be like Miss America contest, and we'll bring the top 5 to you. Then you make the final decision, and we'll have the 5 finalists come to the board meeting, because they have a dinner at the board meeting, and then we'll go through it and announce the winner and that kind of thing. So anyway, we go through all of this, and so we have a winner that they selected and all that thing, and she was at the meeting with the other people. And so they announced a winner, gave the lady the $200, and the winning slogan was this: professionally we serve, personally we care. And I thought, because I was in on when it was going through that, and I said, you know, God, we could have spent $400,000 and not come at anything like that, you know, that good and everything. And so it was just real special. Well, the next day, I asked her to come by my office because to talk a little bit with me, and so she came in and she said, I said, well, let me ask you. I said, how do you come up with that slogan? That was just wonderful. I mean, it was just unbelievable. I can't imagine anything better. And she said, well, it wasn't hard. He said, that's just what I do. And she said, and I said, well, what does it mean? And she said, well, professionally we serve means that we're professionals. You know, we have skills, and we were trained, and we have talents that we give, and we prepare ourselves, and we give this to our patients. Professionally we serve. We give our talents, our training and preparation to our patients. But he said, we really need to do more than that. Personally we care means we give ourselves. We give our talents, we give our training, and we give ourselves. I was sitting there, I sort of teared up a little bit, and I said, God, that's just so special. It's so special to me just to know how you came about and everything. And she said, well, I really want to tell you something else. He said, I know we're in the building program and everything, and he said, I really like to give the $200 toward the building program, if that'd be all right. And she walked out, and I cried. I mean, it just touched me so much. But if you create organizationally, you know, a culture, you know, that focuses on those that are really doing the work, giving the service, you know, and elevate them to the right level, then it'll work.
I noticed you're right about talking with Candace. Since she started as a nurse, she understands.
She does. Candace
she gets it.
She is. Candace got it. Yeah. She is exactly right though. You get more and more remote from the organization, and even at her stage, because even down to the individual hospital type thing, she's operating at such a high level. But how she can pass that her you know, philosophy and her you know, her values on down, you know, is key to it, you know.
Well, one of the things I did when I ran our culture improvement project with Georgia Power, we took a whole group down to Disney.
Yeah.
And what we learned about their culture, it starts on the front end, the hiring process. And went out to Southwest Airlines, and they at that time were the hiring process. And their view was, this was their term. We can let's see, something to the effect that we hire for attitude and train for skill.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
And Disney went through a 4 or 5 step process. And one of those processes was their current employees that interviewed. Do you want this person to be part of your team? And if you continue to do that, you're going to get people. So I think Wellstar is doing that right now, because I've talked to some people that came to work, and it wasn't like you had a phone call and interview, got hired. You went through a process.
Yeah.
And that's the important part of culture. Bernie, is there anything else that we want to ask? You've got 3 or 4 stories, which are perfect.
Yeah, I've got those. Just a couple of names, if you had to say anything about.
Yeah, one of the things we did is we're trying to connect a lot of different people. Are there any?
Lockheed, I didn't even think about Lockheed.
Yeah, we're going there. We're going Lee Ryan probably, or what's the guy that's president of Lockheed before it merged? Drawing a blank right now. Heavily involved still in the community. He's active in Marietta, Kiwanis.
We'll
get Wellstar as a second issue. I think he's on my list.
I was just going to mention some names, if you could just say a few words about.
The what?
I was going to mention some names of people, and if you just wanted to say a few words about them.
Yeah, well.
Like Kessel Stelling, Joe Mack Franklin. Any good stories about those guys?
Yeah, well, in my, and I mentioned some of the individuals along the way that were had such an impact, I guess, in this area. Bob Trillerman is one, Chet Austin, some of them I mentioned before, T.W. Lord. T.W. Lord is one of my heroes, because as soon as I came on board, he was the chairman the next year of the hospital board that I was. So he's been my mentor and just a special guy all the way. And then from a political standpoint that had been so helpful to us all, this was before some of y'all, like Ernest Barrett and Al Burris and Joe Mack Wilson and Roy Barnes, and Roy came a little bit later than that. And then you know, they've just been heroes all the way along, you know. And I don't want to. And physicians too. There have been just a tremendous number of great physicians that help lead us through all of this from their perspective. And there's just so many. It's just hard to, you know, just put a name. You know, too many. You know, just so many.
Any stories?
Yeah.
Coming up? You've told some powerful.
They really
stories.
are. The one that we're really thinking of is Johnny Williams and
Williams.
John Isaacson. Both told this great story about.
I've already talked
Oh,
about it.
okay.
Yeah.
So if you have anything like that, even just like a little PG-13 or something like that, that'd be great.
I'm trying to think about it in my book.
It doesn't have to be that story. Any other story. You know, that's
Well,
okay.
I'll tell you a good one that you think about sometimes is a patient experience where, you know, you find, I've got stories myself about the treatment my wife got at Kennestone, Kennestone Hospital, but they're legendary. I was in the hospital with a blockage. I was in Kennestone about 3 years. And I had so I was there 3 days. I had one nurse that was just off the charts. And I've got some stories about that, but I ended up writing Candace a note. It was that important to me. I sat down and wrote her a note. And I don't do that. I'm terrible at that. I know it's a problem with my style, but I sat down and constructed a letter and sent it to her because of what this lady did for me that she did not have to do. It probably was not in her, I know it wasn't in her job description, but she was a nurse. And she would talk to you, and she'd take the time to actually talk to you.
Yeah, right.
Not just come in and do your vital signs and walk out the door.
Right. Let me try to think. I can't think of names. I can remember the stories. I can't always remember the names. One of the I'll tell you one. If you take this philosophy of turning the organization upside down, and you're sort of at the bottom of the organization, and the other people are really elevating their status and this kind of thing. When I first came to Kennestone, when I came up, I drove up and there was a sign there in the parking lot, and it said administrator slot. I mean, that was an administrator's job. And it was important to be there because the administrator came and went a lot and didn't want to have to take a lot of valuable time in this sort of thing. Well, when I sort of embraced this philosophy of servant leadership and turning the organization upside down, that sort of flew in the face of this because I'm trying to make our people, you know, give them the status that they need and they deserve. And yet, when I come to work every day, I got the first parking place here, they got to go find a parking place and all that kind of stuff. So I decided I'm going to move my parking place and let it be the furthest away from the building rather than the closest to the building. And so nobody particularly paid any attention to it all. I just parked, you know, way at the other end, and that wasn't that big a deal. I mean, it was, you know, another 100 yards or whatever, or coming from another level of the deck or something like that. And so one day, though, we were in a building program. We were having to redo some facilities there, and we were having to take out some of the parking there. So we didn't have adequate parking anyway. So we decided, and we worked out with Whitewater, which was not too far from the hospital there, to rent their space during this particular time. It was during the winter, as I recall, so they weren't operating much anyway. And so we got shuttles that would go back and forth, and it would take several hundred people, you know, to free up the parking while the construction was going on. Well, I got to thinking. I said, you know, now my space is not as far as it was before, and so, but I bit the bullet, and it meant I had to come to work a little bit earlier because I had to get over there, and I'd leave, you know, I'd get home a little bit later. So I was parked in the back of the Whitewater parking lot. So this lady came in one day who was one of our nurses who was she was one of the best nurses we had, but she stood up for the rights of everybody and all that. And she was just incensed about having to come to work early and all that, and telling everybody else did and all this kind of stuff, and how wrong it was and so forth. And she came and talked with me. So I sat in there and listened to it all, and then so finally I said, this is just temporary. She said, I know it, but we need to do better. Our people are important, blah, 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 blah. So she went on and on. So finally I said, okay, I'll tell you what I'll do. It's the only thing I know to do. I can't do anything about it other than that, but I'll let you have my parking place. And she said, well, that wouldn't look real good or anything. But I said, no, I really want you to. I want you to have my parking place. Because you're a good person and you're important here and all that, and I don't want you to be unhappy with all this and everything. And she said, well, I don't know. And I said, you know where my parking place is? She said, no. And I said, well, it's at the back of the Whitewater parking lot. And she said, are you parking over there too? And I said, I sure am. I said, I chose several years ago that I'm not, I used to have a parking place right by the building, and she didn't come in that way, so she didn't even notice it coming and going. And I said, but I decided if I needed to do what everybody else did, and all. So I decided to actually do a little bit more. And so I don't even park at the front of the Whitewater, sorry, I park at the back of the Whitewater thing. And she said, that is amazing. She said, I'm okay with that. And she said, don't worry about it anymore. And so I said, well, I said, let's just work through this together and all that kind of thing. Then I got to thinking. I said, most of my colleagues out there in other jobs like mine, they're fat, and their health is not good, and all this kind of thing, and then they go get their physicals every year, and the first thing the doctor tells them is they got to get more exercise, they got to eat right, that kind of thing, and just go out and walk. And so I said, I'm walking more every day, because I was coming and going a good bit, and I'd just walk back and forth to the car and everything like that. And I said, not only is that the right decision for them, that's the right decision for me too, and it was just so much fun trying to figure out how you can have a philosophy of leadership and put it into practice.
It's hard work.
That's just a little thing, but that's right. That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Anything else? That's a great story.
That's a really great
Anything
story.
else you want to put on tape for the record?
For history?
For history?
For your grandkids?
Oh, my Lord.
Well, your grandkids or your great-grandkids, or when you and I are both, I'm not quite as old as you, but getting close. What do you want people, what do you want to tell people?
Well, one of the things, when Snooky and I bought our property up in North Carolina, and it's sort of our getaway place, it's really nice. It's so much different from here. Here the traffic is built, the congestion, all the issues with a metropolitan area and the hustle and bustle of it all, and the downsides of all that, and getting harder for us to get out. We have to time when we're going somewhere, because I don't drive at night much anymore and all that kind of thing. And so we were asked a bunch of times, because our place up there is, in a small community, the pace is so good. We walk around the lake up there, and people sitting on their porch, and we stop and speak, and just like the old when we're growing up and that kind of thing. And they said, well, why don't you move up here? Why don't you move up here? And so we've discussed that. She and I, do we really want to do? Could we could move up there and even just have a little place there, and then made our main place up there and that kind of thing. And then there are about two things mainly that have kept us from doing that. One is mostly our families here, so we don't want to leave them. But probably just about as equally important is our communities here. community things like our church, you know, and our friends and that kind of thing. But right in there too is the healthcare system. You know, healthcare system, there ain't nothing like the healthcare system down here. You know, if we need something, we have our doctors. If we need something, we have the specialists. If we need facilities, we don't have to go, you know, go a long way from all that. So what has evolved here, it's the wonderful healthcare system is personal to me. In addition, and the good thing about it, that's where it is with everybody. See, I'm just one of everybody else now. Where I used to be sort of in the middle of it all, you know, and it's a joy for me to be in a community that has such a wonderful health system like Wellstar.
Well, congratulations for what you built. It really is fabulous. And people go in that hospital now and they walk up and down the hall. And I know all the time people will sometimes stop and say, "How did we get here?" And you told that story. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you. This is special. I'm amazed you're doing all this. This is
We're having fun. Yeah, we're done.